The great hall of Nexus Prime stretched out like a crystal cathedral, its walls shimmering with captured starlight from 1,000 different worlds. Ambassador Jake Morrison walked down the center aisle, his boots clicking against the polished floor while hundreds of alien eyes watched his every step. Behind him, Admiral Lisa Torres moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had commanded fleets in the void between stars. Captain Ryan Bell brought up the rear, his hand resting casually near his sidearm despite the Council's strict weapons ban. The three humans looked small in the vast chamber, dwarfed by the towering representatives of dozens of alien species. The Cytherian delegation sat on platforms that floated 20 feet above the floor, their crystalline bodies catching and reflecting light in patterns that hurt human eyes to follow. The massive Zentari ambassador filled an entire section with his bulk, his 6 arms gesturing as he whispered to his aides through translator devices that buzzed and clicked. High Arbitrator Vexthal rose from his position at the center of the circular chamber. His species had ruled this part of the galaxy for over 10,000 years, and his voice carried the weight of that ancient authority when he spoke. The words came through the translation matrix as perfectly calm and measured, but Jake could hear the underlying current of satisfaction in the alien's tone. "The Terran delegation will stand before the judgment seat," Vexthal announced, his multiple eyes focusing on the humans with predatory intensity. "Today we address crimes that threaten the very foundation of galactic civilization." Jake stepped forward and placed his hands behind his back in a relaxed parade rest position. He had attended these council sessions for 12 years, representing Earth's interests in a body that had never truly accepted humanity as equals. Today felt different, though. Today felt like an ending. The charges came in a flood of alien voices, each species eager to add their complaints to the growing list. The Zaltharian Empire's representative, a tall being with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that glowed red in the chamber's light, spoke first. His accusations rang through the hall with theatrical outrage. The humans violated every treaty of civilized warfare when they destroyed our mining operations on Kepler 442b, the Zaltharian declared, his voice rising to a pitch that made several species cover their hearing organs. They attacked without declaring war, refused to accept our surrender, and worst of all, they freed the workers we had legally contracted for mineral extraction. Jake felt his jaw tighten but kept his expression neutral. The Zaltharian had conveniently left out that those legally contracted workers had been children stolen from their families and forced to work in conditions that killed most of them within 2 years. He also failed to mention that the humans had offered the Zaltharian fleet multiple chances to withdraw before opening fire. Admiral Torres shifted slightly beside him, and Jake caught the almost invisible shake of her head. Not yet. They would have their chance to speak. The accusations continued for nearly an hour. The humans had been too aggressive in protecting trade routes from pirates. They had refused to follow proper diplomatic channels when rescuing refugees from war zones. They had developed weapons technology without sharing it freely with the Council. They had established colonies in disputed territories without waiting for the Council's lengthy approval process that often took decades to complete. Each complaint painted humanity as a rogue element in galactic society, a species too violent and unpredictable to be trusted with full membership in the community of worlds. Jake listened to it all with growing amazement at how thoroughly the Council had missed the point of every single human action. When the formal accusations finally ended, High Arbitrator Vexthal gestured for silence. The chamber fell quiet except for the soft humming of the translation systems and the distant sound of Nexus Prime's twin suns heating the crystal walls. "Ambassador Morrison," Vexthal said, his voice carrying easily across the vast space, "how does humanity respond to these charges?" Jake stepped forward and looked up at the floating platforms where the most powerful beings in the galaxy sat, in judgment. For a moment he considered giving them the diplomatic response he had prepared, full of careful words and legal technicalities that would buy Earth more time. Instead, he found himself speaking from the heart. "We respond by asking a simple question," Jake said, his voice clear and steady. "What would you have done? When you found children dying in Zaltharian mines, would you have filed a formal protest? And waited 3 years for the council to schedule a hearing? When pirates were slaughtering entire merchant crews, would you have organized a committee to study the problem? When refugees were starving in camps while bureaucrats argued over jurisdiction, would you have let them die for the sake of proper procedure? The chamber erupted in angry voices as dozens of species tried to respond at once. Some defended the council's careful approach to galactic problems. Others demanded that Jake show proper respect for the ancient institutions that maintained peace among the stars. A few voices, Jake noticed with interest, remained silent. Vexthel called for order with a gesture that sent ripples of light across his crystalline form. When the noise died down, he leaned forward on his platform, his alien features set in. What Jake had learned to recognize as contempt. Humanity's emotional responses are precisely the problem, the High Arbitrator said. Civilization requires order, process, and most importantly, restraint. Your species acts first and considers consequences later. This makes you dangerous to the stability we have spent millennia creating. Captain Bell took a half-step forward, his soldier's instincts clearly bristling at the condescension in the alien's voice. Jake held up a hand to stop him, but not before several council members noticed the movement and whispered among themselves about human aggression. The trial, if it could be called that, continued for hours. Witness after witness testified about human actions that had technically violated council protocols. The rescue of the Andromedan refugees who had been abandoned by their own government. The destruction of a slave-trading operation that had been operating under legal permits issued by corrupt council officials. The establishment of medical stations in neutral space to help species, whose own governments refused to provide adequate health care. Every good deed was twisted into evidence of humanity's fundamental unsuitability for civilized society. Every act of mercy became proof of their dangerous impulsiveness. Every moment when humans had chosen to help rather than follow proper channels was presented as a threat to galactic order. As the testimonies droned on, Jake found himself studying the faces around him. Some showed genuine fear of what humanity might become if left unchecked. Others displayed the cold calculation of species that saw an opportunity to remove a competitor. A few seemed uncomfortable with the proceedings, but none spoke up in humanity's defense. Finally, as Nexus Prime's suns began to set and the crystal walls shifted from gold to deep purple, High Arbitrator Vexthel rose to deliver the council's judgment. The chamber fell completely silent as every being present recognized the historic nature of the moment. The Galactic Council finds that humanity poses a clear and present danger to civilized society. Vexthel announced, his words echoing off the crystal walls. Your species' inability to control its aggressive instincts and follow established procedures threatens the peace we have maintained for thousands of years. Jake felt Admiral Torres tense beside him, but her expression remained perfectly calm. Captain Bell's hand moved closer to his sidearm, not in threat but in the unconscious reaction of a soldier hearing enemy intentions. Therefore, Vexthel continued, the Council offers humanity a choice. You may accept behavioral modification through neural implants that will suppress your violent tendencies and allow you to function as productive members of galactic society. You will submit to permanent council oversight of all military operations and colonial expansion. You will pay reparations to all species harmed by your unauthorized actions, beginning with the Zeltharian Empire. The High Arbitrator paused, letting the weight of the ultimatum settle over the chamber. When he spoke again, his voice carried the finality of absolute authority. Or you may choose exile from galactic civilization, abandoning your colonies, and returning to your single world to contemplate the price of defying the natural order of things. Jake looked up at the alien faces surrounding him, seeing satisfaction and smug confidence in their expressions. They believed they had finally solved the human problem, that Earth would have no choice but to accept their terms. After all, what could one species do against the combined might of the entire galaxy? Jake smiled, an expression so cold and predatory that several nearby delegates actually flinched. When he spoke, his voice carried across the silent chamber with perfect clarity. "We'll need time to consider your generous offer," he said, putting just enough emphasis on generous to make it clear what he thought of their ultimatum. "How long do we have?" Vexthal's crystalline features shifted in what Jake had learned was the Catherian equivalent of a dismissive shrug. 72 standard hours should be sufficient for even humans to reach the obvious conclusion. Jake nodded politely and turned to leave, Admiral Torres and Captain Bell falling into step beside. The message reached Earth Defense Command 43 minutes after Captain Bell sent it from Nexus Prime. Admiral Kate Sullivan sat in her command chair deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, watching as the coded transmission decoded itself on her screens. Protocol 77 Alpha had been theoretical until now, a contingency plan that military strategists hoped would never be needed. Today it became reality. Admiral Sullivan turned to her communications officer, a young lieutenant named Chris Parker, whose family had served in Earth's military for 6 generations. The weight of what she was about to order settled on her shoulders like a physical burden, but her voice remained steady when she spoke. "Send the recall signal to all human assets outside Sol System," she commanded. "Operation Exodus is now active. Authorization Sullivan Alpha 77. Lieutenant Parker's fingers flew across his control panel, sending the encrypted message to relay stations throughout human space. Within minutes, the signal would reach every human ship, station, colony, and outpost scattered across dozens of star systems. By the end of the day, humanity would begin the greatest withdrawal in galactic history. Commander Amy Rodriguez was inspecting the medical laboratories on Tau SETI station when the message arrived. She read the orders twice, then called her senior staff to the main conference room. The station housed 40,000 researchers, technicians, and support personnel who had spent the last 15 years developing medical technology that had revolutionized healthcare for dozens of alien species. "Pack everything," Amy told her department heads, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had survived 3 wars and knew how to make hard decisions. "All research data, all equipment that can be moved, all personal effects. Anything we can't take gets destroyed according to Protocol 77 Alpha specifications." Dr. Kevin Walsh, the station's chief researcher, looked stunned. "Commander, we're talking about centuries of accumulated knowledge. The cancer treatments alone could save billions of lives across the galaxy. Are we really going to destroy all of that?" Amy met his gaze without flinching. "The Council made their position clear, Doctor. They believe humanity is too dangerous to remain free. If that's their decision, then our technology is too dangerous to leave behind." The evacuation began immediately. Transport ships that had been secretly positioned throughout human space revealed themselves and began the massive task of moving entire populations. The efficiency of the operation shocked even the humans involved, revealing just how thoroughly Earth's military had planned for this possibility. On the frontier world of New Colorado, Governor Pete Jackson coordinated the evacuation of 2 million colonists who had spent 3 generations turning a desert planet into a garden world. The colonists worked with quiet determination, loading everything from livestock to industrial equipment onto the massive cargo ships that seemed to appear from nowhere. The terraforming processes that had taken decades to build were carefully dismantled and loaded onto specialized transport vessels. The vast agricultural complexes that fed a dozen nearby star systems were stripped down to their component parts. Even the trees that lined the capital city's boulevards were dug up and prepared for transport, their root systems wrapped in specially designed containers. "Leave nothing useful behind," Pete told his evacuation coordinators as he watched the last of the farming equipment being loaded. "If we built it, we take it. If we can't take it, we make sure no one else can use it." The alien residents of New Colorado watched in growing confusion as their human neighbors systematically erased all traces of their presence. Some tried to convince the humans to stay, offering protection and support against whatever had prompted this sudden exodus. The humans politely declined and continued packing. Admiral Nick Carter commanded the wreckle of the human defense fleet from their positions throughout the galaxy. Battle groups that had protected alien worlds for decades simply vanished from their patrol routes, leaving behind empty space and frantic communications from the worlds they had been guarding. The withdrawal was surgical in its precision. Human ships appeared at designated coordinates, loaded their assigned cargo or personnel, and jumped back to Sol System within hours. The timing was so exact that some alien governments didn't realize the humans were leaving until they were already gone. The most shocking evacuations came from the sanctuary worlds, planets where humans had spent generations protecting endangered alien species and refugees. Dr. Sarah Kim led the evacuation from Haven 7, where human conservationists had created the galaxy's largest preserve for species facing extinction. "We're taking our people and our equipment," Sarah explained to the delegation of alien scientists who begged them to stay. "The preserve will continue to function for approximately 6 months on automated systems. After that, you'll need to find someone else to maintain it." The alien scientists stared in disbelief as human researchers loaded their laboratories onto transport ships. Breeding programs that had brought dozens of species back from the brink of extinction would collapse without human expertise. Ecosystems that existed only because of human intervention would begin to fail within months. Similar scenes played out across human space. The massive industrial complex at Kepler Station that produced advanced materials for alien construction projects was dismantled piece by piece. The research facility on Proxima Base that had been working on faster-than-light communication technology was evacuated. Its computers wiped clean of decades of research. The speed of the withdrawal caught even the Galactic Council off guard. They had expected humanity to take the full 72 hours to consider their options, followed by lengthy negotiations about the terms of their surrender. Instead, human assets began disappearing from the galactic community within hours of the ultimatum being delivered. Emergency council sessions were called as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The humans weren't just leaving their military bases and colonies. They were evacuating their hospitals, research stations, trading posts, and even their diplomatic missions. Every human presence outside Sol System was being systematically eliminated. High Arbitrator Vexthal tried to contact Ambassador Morrison, but received only automated responses stating that the human embassy on Nexus Prime was closed indefinitely. When Council security forces arrived at the embassy, they found it completely empty except for a single message displayed on every screen in the building. "Humanity accepts the Council's judgment that we are unfit for galactic society," the message read. "We are withdrawing all human presence from Council space effective immediately. Thank you for making our decision clear." The implications began sinking in as reports continued to arrive. The trade routes that human ships had patrolled for decades were suddenly unprotected. The medical stations that had provided free health care to refugee populations were shutting down. The research facilities that had been developing solutions to galactic problems were going dark. Most concerning of all were the messages coming from the frontier worlds, human colonies that had served as buffers between hostile alien empires were evacuating, leaving power vacuums that ambitious species were already moving to fill. The careful balance of power that had maintained galactic peace was beginning to crumble. Admiral Carter's flagship, the battlecruiser Independence, was among the last human ships to leave the galactic core. As it prepared to jump back to Sol System, Carter sent a final message to the alien fleets that had worked alongside human forces for decades. "It has been an honor serving with you," the message said. "We hope the galaxy finds the peace it seeks without us." The Independence vanished in a flash of displaced space-time, leaving behind only confused alien commanders and a growing sense that something fundamental had changed in the balance of galactic power. On Earth, Admiral Sullivan watched the status boards as human assets reported their successful evacuation. Colony after colony showed green lights as their populations reached safety. Military units checked in as they passed through the defensive perimeter around Sol System. Research stations transmitted their final status reports before going permanently offline. The scale of what humanity was abandoning became clear as the reports continued. Trillions of credits in infrastructure, centuries of scientific research, colonies that had housed millions of people, all sacrificed in the name of independence. The Council had given humanity a choice between submission and exile, never imagining that any species would willingly choose isolation over membership in galactic civilization. As the last transport ships reached Earth's outer system, automated beacons activated throughout former human space. Each beacon broadcast the same simple message in every known galactic language. This system formerly under human protection. Defense and support services terminated by Council decree. Do not attempt to follow human ships. Any vessel entering Sol system will be considered hostile. The galaxy had demanded that humanity choose between freedom and civilization. In the end, humanity had chosen freedom, and the consequences of that choice were about to reshape the galaxy. In ways no one could predict, the withdrawal was complete, but the real test was just beginning. 6 months after humanity's withdrawal, Captain Marcus Vale of the Zentari Merchant Marine found himself staring at his ship's scanner in disbelief. The Nexus trade route, once the safest shipping lane in the galaxy, now showed dozens of hostile contacts moving in formation toward his cargo convoy. Pirates had taken over the space that human patrol ships had protected for 30 years. "Captain," his communications officer called out, her voice tight with fear. "They're demanding we surrender our cargo and prepare to be boarded." "Sir, these aren't just raiders, these are military-grade vessels." Marcus gripped his command chair as the pirate fleet surrounded his convoy of 12 merchant ships. Before the human withdrawal, a distress call would have brought Earth Defense Force ships within minutes. Now the emergency channels carried only static and automated messages stating that protection services were no longer available. The first merchant ship in the convoy tried to run. The pirates destroyed it with casual efficiency, turning a vessel carrying medical supplies to refugee camps into expanding debris. The remaining ships surrendered without further resistance, their captains knowing they had no choice, on the frontier world of Kepler 438c. Administrator Helen Cross watched through her office window as the third evacuation ship lifted off from the spaceport. The human colony that had spent 40 years building a thriving agricultural center was packing up and leaving, taking their expertise and equipment with them. "Ma'am," her aide reported, "the Zeltharian Empire has filed a territorial claim on this system. They're demanding we recognize their authority over all former human colonies." Helen wasn't surprised. The Zeltharians had been testing boundaries ever since humanity disappeared from galactic affairs. What had once been protected space was now seen as unclaimed territory, ripe for conquest by whoever moved fastest. The human colonists had offered to stay if the local government could guarantee their protection, but Helen knew her world small. Defense Force couldn't stand against a single Zeltharian battleship. The humans were being practical in their evacuation, but their departure left a Kepler 438c defenseless against the expanding empire on Nexus Prime. High Arbitrator Vexthal faced his first major crisis since humanity's withdrawal. The Andorian Federation, a peaceful species known for their art and philosophy, had sent desperate messages requesting immediate council intervention. The Zeltharian Empire had begun systematic attacks on Andorian worlds, claiming they were establishing a new order in sectors formerly protected by human forces. The Andorians never needed a large military because humanity provided their security, Council member Thera of the Vasek Alliance pointed out during the emergency session. Without human protection, they're helpless against any aggressive species. Vexthal studied the tactical reports with growing unease. The Zeltharian Empire had tripled in size over the past 6 months, absorbing smaller species and claiming abandoned human territories. Their military had grown bold without human forces to check their expansion. "We could authorize a council." "Peacekeeping force," suggested the representative from the Corvani Republic, but his words lacked conviction. Council forces had never been designed for large-scale military operations. They had always relied on human ships to handle serious threats. The first Andorian city fell 3 days later. The images that reached Nexus Prime showed Zeltharian forces, burning cultural centers that had stood for thousands of years. The peaceful Andorians, who had spent centuries perfecting art and music instead of warfare, were slaughtered by the thousands. Captain Ben Taylor commanded one of the few human observation posts still operating outside Sol System. Hidden in a dead system on the edge of former human space, his ship monitored galactic communications and recorded events for Earth's intelligence services. Through his long-range sensors, Ben watched Zeltharian fleets attack Andorian colonies, with weapons that violated every treaty of civilized warfare. His orders were explicit: observe and record only, no matter what he witnessed. The directive came directly from Earth Defense Command and carried the authority of humanity's new isolation policy. "Captain," his sensor operator reported, "the Zeltharians are using bioweapons on the civilian population of New Andoria. The entire planetary surface will be uninhabitable within hours." Ben forced himself to remain in his command chair as he watched an entire world die. Before humanity's withdrawal, such an attack would have brought immediate retaliation from human forces. The Zeltharians wouldn't have dared use bioweapons with human ships patrolling the region. Now they acted with complete impunity. Knowing no one could stop them, the galactic economy began showing serious strain as the months passed. Human innovation had driven technological progress for decades, and their sudden absence created gaps that other species couldn't fill. The medical research that had been conducted on human stations had vanished behind the barriers around Sol System, leaving dozens of species without treatments for genetic disorders and viral infections. Dr. Rachel Stone had been working on a cure for the Cytherian genetic plague that threatened High Arbitrator Vexthal's entire species. Her research facility on Titan Base had been the galaxy's leading center for genetic medicine, with resources and equipment that took generations to develop. When humanity withdrew, all of that research disappeared. The first Cytherian colonies began going silent as the plague spread without check. The disease attacked the crystalline structure that formed the basis of Cytherian biology, causing their bodies to slowly dissolve into component elements. Without human medical intervention, Vexthal's species faced extinction within a single generation. Desperate communications flooded toward Sol System from Cytherian worlds, offering everything from entire star systems to ancient technologies. In exchange for Dr. Stone's research, the responses came back through automated systems with the same message: no assistance available. Contact your local Galactic Council representative for support. The irony wasn't lost on Vexthal. The council that had demanded humanity submit to behavioral modification now found itself begging for human help, only to be referred back to their own authority. Meanwhile, the Zeltharian Empire continued its expansion. Emperor Zarthok had declared a new age of Zeltharian dominance, claiming that humanity's withdrawal proved the weakness of the old galactic order. His fleets moved from system to system, demanding submission from species that had never needed to develop serious military capabilities. The peaceful trading worlds of the Sigma sector fell within a week. Their defense forces, designed to handle pirates and smugglers, couldn't stand against Zeltharian battlecruisers. The worlds that surrendered were stripped of resources and enslaved. Those that resisted were simply destroyed. Council member Thara watched the tactical displays with growing horror as red markers, representing Zeltharian conquests, spread across the galactic map. In 6 months, they had conquered more territory than any empire in recorded history. "We have to do something," she told the other council members during another emergency session. "If this continues, the Zeltharians will control half the galaxy within a year." But what could they do? The council's own forces were designed for peacekeeping, not warfare against a military power that had learned to fight without restraint. The species that made up the council had spent centuries relying on human strength to maintain stability. Without that strength, they were discovering how vulnerable they truly were. The crisis deepened when the Zentari Confederation announced they were negotiating a defense treaty with the Zeltharian Empire. Faced with the choice between conquest and collaboration, they chose survival. Other species began following their example. either joining the Zaltharian expansion or fleeing toward the Galactic Rim on his hidden observation ship, Captain Taylor recorded the systematic collapse of the galactic order that had existed for thousands of years. The careful balance of power maintained by human forces was unraveling as ambitious species seized territory and resources without fear of intervention. His reports back to Earth painted a clear picture. The galaxy was consuming itself in the absence of the peacekeepers it had rejected. The council that had judged humanity too dangerous to remain free now watched helplessly as real dangers ran unchecked through civilized space. Back on Nexus Prime, High Arbitrator Vexthal stood in his private chambers studying the genetic plague. Markers that were appearing across his own crystalline skin. His species had perhaps 6 months before the disease reached critical stages. The human research that could save them remained locked behind barriers his people couldn't breach. He had authorized 3 separate attempts to contact Earth directly, bypassing the automated systems that continued to refuse all requests for assistance. Each attempt had failed, met by defense networks that seemed to anticipate every approach. The galaxy was learning what it meant to stand alone, and the lesson was written in burning worlds and dying species. Humanity had withdrawn as requested, taking with them the strength and protection that others had taken for granted. What remained was a galaxy discovering that civilization required more than laws and councils to survive. It required guardians, and those guardians were gone. 2 years after humanity's withdrawal, Admiral Danny Foster led the most desperate mission in Galactic Council history. His fleet of 12 vessels represented the combined military might of 6 different species, all united by a single purpose: reach Earth and beg for humanity's return. The galaxy burned around them while they traveled toward Sol System, hoping to find salvation in the space that had become Forbidden's territory. Foster's flagship, the Council cruiser Harmony, pushed through the outer reaches of the solar system. While his sensors showed readings that made no sense, the asteroid belt that had once been a simple navigation hazard now pulsed with energy signatures unlike anything in known space. Automated defense platforms appeared on his screens, weapons already tracking his fleet's approach. "Admiral," his tactical officer reported, "I'm reading 17 distinct weapon systems targeting our lead ships. Sir, the power readings are off our scales. Whatever those platforms are armed with, they could destroy our entire fleet without effort." Foster had expected resistance, but the sheer scale of humanity's defenses shocked him. In 2 years of isolation, they had turned their home system into an impregnable fortress. The platforms that emerged from the asteroid field moved with perfect coordination, taking positions that would allow them to destroy any approaching fleet from multiple angles. The communication that came through Foster's speakers carried no emotion, just cold mechanical precision. "Council fleet, you have entered restricted space. Turn back immediately or face destruction. This is your only warning." Foster activated his own communication system, knowing this might be his last chance to save what remained of galactic civilization. "This is Admiral Foster of the Galactic Council Fleet. I request permission to speak with human leadership. The galaxy needs your help." The response came instantly. The Galactic Council made its position clear 2 years ago. Humanity was judged unfit for civilized society. We accepted that judgment and removed ourselves from galactic affairs. Turn back now. But Foster had seen too much death to give up easily. The Zaltharian Empire now controlled nearly half the galaxy, their conquest marked by the systematic destruction of any species that refused to submit. Entire worlds had been sterilized when their populations proved too difficult to enslave. The peaceful civilizations that had once flourished under human protection had been reduced to scattered refugees fleeing through space. "Please," Foster transmitted, "the Andorian Federation faces complete extinction. The Zaltharians are using weapons that kill entire planets. Without your intervention, billions will die in the next few months." The silence that followed lasted so long that Foster began to think his message hadn't been received. Then a new voice came through the communication system, one that made several of his bridge crew gasp in recognition. Admiral Lisa Torres, who had stood trial before the Council 2 years earlier, spoke with the authority of someone who commanded forces beyond imagination. "Admiral Foster," Torres said, "humanity offered to protect the galaxy as partners. The Council chose to treat us as dangerous animals that needed to be caged. We accepted your judgment and removed the danger by leaving. The consequences of that decision belong to you." Foster stared at his tactical display as more human defense platforms revealed themselves. The number of weapons now targeting his fleet had grown to over 100, each one more powerful than anything his ships carried. The humans had used their isolation to build defenses that could hold off the entire galaxy. "Admiral Torres," Foster said, "I was there when the Council made that decision. I voted against it. Many of us did. We were wrong to try to control humanity, but that doesn't mean innocent species should pay the price for our mistakes." This time the response came faster, but with no warmth in Torres's voice. "You were outvoted, Admiral. The majority of the Council decided humanity was too dangerous to remain free. We respected that decision and made sure we would never again pose a threat to galactic civilization." Foster's fleet hung motionless at the edge of the solar system while the Admiral considered his options. He could try to force his way through the human defenses, but that would mean the destruction of his ships and crews without accomplishing anything. He could return to the Council with news of his failure, but that would just confirm what everyone already knew: humanity was beyond their reach. Instead, Foster decided to tell the truth about what the galaxy had become in humanity's absence. "Admiral Torres," he began, "the Zeltharian Empire has developed planet-killer weapons. They've used them 17 times in the past 6 months. Entire worlds, billions of sentient beings, simply erased from existence. The Andorian homeworld fell last week. 23 billion people died in less than an hour." For the first time, Foster detected something other than cold professionalism in Torres's voice when she responded. "And where was the Galactic Council during these attacks? Where were the peacekeeping forces that were supposed to maintain order after humanity withdrew?" Foster closed his eyes, knowing his next words would confirm humanity's worst assumptions about the Council's capabilities. "Our peacekeeping forces were destroyed in the first month of Zeltharian expansion. We never had the military strength to handle a real war. We always relied on human forces for that." The admission hung in space between the two fleets, carrying the weight of galactic civilization's failure. The Council had spent centuries maintaining the illusion that they could handle any crisis, when, in reality, they had been utterly dependent on human protection. "So let me understand this correctly," Torres said, her voice carrying a note of dark amusement. "The Council decided humanity was too dangerous and militaristic to remain in galactic society. Then, when faced with an actual military threat, you discovered that you needed exactly the kind of dangerous militarism you rejected." Foster had no answer to that. The irony was too perfect and too painful to deny. Torres continued, her words cutting through Foster's hopes like a blade. "The Council made its choice, Admiral. You decided that galactic civilization was better off without human protection. We gave you exactly what you asked for. The galaxy is now free to handle its own problems without interference from dangerous humans." The tactical display showed human ships emerging from hidden positions throughout the solar system. Not the small patrol vessels that Foster remembered from before the withdrawal, but massive warships that dwarfed anything in his fleet. The humans had spent 2 years preparing for exactly this kind of approach, building defenses that could stop any force the galaxy might send. "Please," Foster said one final time, "we're not asking you to rejoin the Council or accept our authority. We're asking you to help innocent species that had nothing to do with the decision to exile you." The response came not from Torres but from a new voice, one that Foster recognized as Admiral Kate Sullivan from Earth Defense Command. "Admiral Foster, humanity learned an important lesson during our isolation. We learned that we don't need galactic civilization, but apparently galactic civilization needs us. The question is, what is that need worth?" Foster felt a spark of hope at Sullivan's words. "What do you mean?" We mean, Sullivan said, that humanity is no longer interested in being junior partners in someone else's empire. We're not interested in council oversight or alien judgment of our actions. If we intervene in galactic affairs, it will be on our terms, according to our values, and without interference from species that proved they would rather see billions die than allow humans to act freely. The implications of Sullivan's words sank in as Foster realized what she was offering. Humanity might help, but they would do so as a power equal to or greater than the Council, not as members seeking approval. Think carefully, Admiral Foster, Torres added. If you want human help, you'll get human methods. We don't follow proper channels when people are dying. We don't wait for committee approval when worlds are being destroyed. We act first and worry about diplomatic consequences later. The Council called that dangerous. Are you prepared to accept that danger in exchange for our protection? Foster looked at his tactical display, seeing the overwhelming power humanity had built during their isolation. He thought about the burning worlds behind him, the refugees fleeing through space, the species facing extinction because the Council had been too proud to accept humanity as equals. The choice was simple. Accept human terms or watch the galaxy die. Admiral Sullivan, Foster said, the Council authorizes me to negotiate any agreement necessary to secure human assistance. Then prepare for the galaxy to change, Admiral, Sullivan replied. Because humanity is coming back, and this time we're not asking permission. Foster's fleet turned and began the long journey back to Council space, carrying with them the news that would reshape galactic civilization. Humanity had agreed to return, but they would return as conquerors of necessity, not as supplicants. Seeking acceptance, the galaxy had rejected human partnership and would now learn what human dominance looked like. Emperor Zarthok of the Zeltharian Empire stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Devastator, watching his fleet prepare for the final assault on the galactic core worlds. 3,000 warships stretched out before him, the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. Victory was so close he could taste it, and nothing in the known galaxy could stop him from claiming absolute dominion over every inhabited world. The Emperor's fleet had just finished destroying the last major Council stronghold, turning the fortress world of Terminus Prime into radioactive debris. The remaining Council forces had retreated to their final defensive positions around Nexus Prime, but Zarthok knew their resistance would crumble within hours. His planet-killer weapons had broken the spirit of every species that dared oppose him. My lord, his fleet commander reported. Our forward scouts confirm that the Council's remaining ships are gathering around Nexus Prime. Their total force consists of perhaps 200 vessels, mostly light cruisers and patrol ships. They pose no significant threat to our advance. Zarthok nodded with satisfaction. The galaxy had proven even weaker than he had expected once the humans disappeared. Species that had seemed powerful under human protection revealed themselves to be helpless sheep without their guardians. The great galactic council that had ruled for thousands of years would fall in a single day. Begin the final assault, Zarthok commanded. I want every council world burning before sunset. Any species that surrenders will be enslaved. Any that resist will be exterminated. Today marks the beginning of the Zeltharian Age. The Emperor's fleet moved toward Nexus Prime with the confidence of predators approaching helpless prey. Their weapons charged, their shields raised, their crews eager to claim the ultimate prize. The crystal world that had been the center of galactic civilization for millennia would become the capital of Zarthok's empire that then space itself seemed to tear apart. The quantum signatures that appeared on Zeltharian sensors made no sense. Massive objects were emerging from jump space at coordinates that should have been empty void. The energy readings were so intense that several monitoring stations overloaded and shut down to prevent damage to their systems. When the distortions cleared, the Zeltharian fleet found themselves facing something that challenged their understanding of what was possible. Human ships emerged from the quantum rifts, but these were not the vessels that had withdrawn from galactic space 3 years earlier. These were warships the size of small moons, their hulls bristling with weapons that seemed to bend light around them. The flagship that led the human fleet dwarfed even Zarthak's massive Devastator. The name painted on its hull in letters visible from thousands of kilometers away read Retribution, and it moved through space with the terrible grace of an apex predator. Admiral Lisa Torres stood on the bridge of the Retribution, looking out at the Zeltharian fleet that had terrorized the galaxy for 3 years. Her ship alone carried more firepower than the entire Zeltharian armada, and it was just one of 50 vessels that had emerged from human space. The technology humanity had developed during their isolation made their previous capabilities look primitive by comparison. "Open a channel to all Zeltharian forces," Torres commanded. Her communications officer nodded and activated the transmission system that would reach every ship in Zarthak's fleet. Torres's voice carried across space with the authority of absolute power. By order of the Human Defense Force, all Zeltharian vessels will withdraw to their original borders within 72 hours. Any ship found outside Zeltharian space after that deadline will be destroyed. This is your only warning. On the bridge of the Devastator, Emperor Zarthak stared at the tactical display showing the human fleet. The numbers didn't make sense. 50 ships against 3,000 should have been hopeless odds, but something about the human vessels made his experienced fleet commanders nervous. The energy signatures coming from their weapons were unlike anything in known space. "My lord," his science officer reported, "I'm reading power levels that exceed our theoretical maximums. Those ships appear to be armed with weapons that harness stellar energy directly. The largest vessel is generating enough power to supply our entire fleet." Zarthak had not conquered half the galaxy by backing down from challenges. His empire had grown strong by destroying anyone who opposed him, and these humans were just another obstacle to overcome. Their ships might be large, but size meant nothing against superior numbers and proven Zeltharian tactics. "Demonstrate our resolve," Zarthak ordered. "Target the nearest inhabited world and fire the planet killer. Show these humans what happens to those who threaten the Zeltharian Empire." The massive beam weapon that had destroyed 17 worlds charged to full power and fired toward the planet Sanctuary 7, home to 2 billion refugees who had fled Zeltharian conquest. The energy beam that could crack a planet's crust streaked across space with enough destructive force to end an entire civilization. The beam simply vanished. One moment it was racing toward its target, the next it had been absorbed by human technology that seemed to violate the fundamental laws of physics. The refugees on Sanctuary 7 never even knew they had been targeted for extinction. Admiral Torres watched the failed attack with cold satisfaction. "Emperor Zarthak has chosen to demonstrate Zeltharian methods. Now we demonstrate ours." What followed wasn't a battle in any traditional sense. It was an education in the difference between conquest and absolute superiority. The Zeltharian Empire had built its power on overwhelming force and terror tactics, but they had never faced an enemy that could simply ignore their most powerful weapons. Human ships moved through the Zeltharian formation like predators through a flock of helpless birds, their weapons surgically removing threats without destroying the crews. Zarthak watched in growing horror as his fleet was systematically disabled around him. Zeltharian warships found their weapons offline, their shields collapsed, their engines dead. Not destroyed, just rendered completely powerless by technology that seemed to reach inside their ships and turn off whatever systems the humans chose to target. "My lord," his fleet commander reported, his voice cracking with panic, "we've lost contact with 2/3 of our ships. They're not responding to any commands. It's like they've been frozen in space." The Emperor tried to order a retreat, but discovered that his own ship's engines had been disabled along with the rest. The mighty Devastator, flagship of the greatest military force in galactic history, hung helpless in space while human ships positioned themselves around it with casual precision. The final shock came when Emperor Zarthak found himself standing in the cargo bay of the Retribution, transported there by technology that had simply moved him through solid matter. He stood before Admiral Torres. the human who had been judged too dangerous for galactic society, and realized that the Council's greatest mistake had been setting humanity free to develop their true potential. "Your empire is finished," Torres told him, her voice carrying the certainty of absolute victory. "Your fleets are captured, your planet-killer weapons are neutralized, and your conquered worlds are being liberated as we speak. You have 72 hours to return to Zeltharian space and begin releasing all enslaved populations." Zarthok tried to summon the rage that had carried him through 100 conquests, but found only empty fear. "You cannot defeat the entire galaxy. Other species will rise to challenge you. You are just one race among thousands." Torres smiled, and Zarthok understood why the Galactic Council had been afraid of humanity. "Emperor, you misunderstand our position. We're not trying to conquer the galaxy. We're simply removing a threat to innocent species. What happens after that is not our concern." The Emperor found himself back on his bridge moments later, with no memory of how the transfer had occurred. Around him, his fleet remained frozen in space while human ships prepared to escort them back to Zeltharian territory. The empire he had built through terror and violence had been dismantled in less than a day by beings who treated his most powerful weapons like toys on Nexus Prime. High Arbitrator Vexthal watched the human fleet's demonstration with a mixture of awe and terror. The species the Council had tried to control now possessed power that made them the undisputed masters of galactic space. The question was no longer whether humanity would return to galactic civilization, but what role everyone else would play in the new order that Ambassador Jake Morrison materialized on the Council platform through the same transportation technology that had moved Emperor Zarthok. But unlike the captured Emperor, Jake came as an equal addressing subordinates. "The human intervention is complete," Jake announced to the assembled Council. "The Zeltharian threat has been neutralized, enslaved. Populations are being freed, and conquered worlds are being returned to their original governments. The galaxy is safe." Vexthal leaned forward, his crystalline features reflecting the lights of the chamber. "And what does humanity want in return for this service?" Jake's answer carried the weight of a fundamental change in galactic civilization. "Nothing. We want nothing from you. We learned during our isolation that we don't need galactic civilization. But apparently galactic civilization needs us.